Hi, everyone, and welcome to this session on tracker-to-aggregate. We have three speakers today. Myself, I'm Olav, Jim, and Oswald. So we hope Oswald will show up soon. He's not here yet, but he's towards the end, so let's hope he makes it. So the topic for this session is tracker-to-aggregate, how to link up tracker data with aggregate data in DHIS2. So I'll start by giving just a brief intro to this whole concept and how we recommend doing that in DHIS now, with some of the limitations and plans for further improving it. Then Jim will talk about the exciting new stuff, which is program indicator disaggregations. I don't know if you want to give a teaser for that now, or you want to save it for later.
Yeah, mostly save it for later, but there's some exciting performance improvements, we hope, and we know, and you will see it too someday if you use tracker-to-aggregate with disaggregations.
Yep. And then Oswald from Ghana Health Service will share some early experience with using this new program indicator disaggregation functionality on one of the Ghana tracker databases. So I guess we just get started. I don't know if someone from the Ghana team wants to see if you can get hold of Oswald and make sure he shows up within the next half hour. Okay, so what is this tracker-to-aggregate that we're referring to here? In this session, when we talk about tracker-to-aggregate, we're referring specifically to taking your aggregate counts from a tracker program and saving them as aggregate data values in the DHIS2 aggregate data model. So, I mean, there are other ways you can look at the aggregate counts from tracker in DHIS2. You can use the report event visualizer apps. You can use your program indicators directly in the data visualizer. You can combine tracker and aggregate data and indicators, etc. So there are different ways of looking at aggregate counts from tracker, but that's not what we're talking about here. We're focusing specifically on taking tracker data, aggregating it, and saving that data as aggregate data values in the aggregate data model of DHIS2. So why do we think that's important to be able to support? First of all, tracker is often implemented, or almost always, I would say, as part of a bigger system, where a lot of the other data, related data, is aggregate. So it's part of a system where you have both aggregate and case-based data. And if you want to look at that together, you typically need to bring the aggregate tracker data into the aggregate domain to be able to triangulate and do comparisons and analysis. We also know that even within a particular health program, a tracker implementation might not cover everything. You might not be able to cover all health facilities, at least not immediately. Might not cover both the public, private, NGO sector. You might not reach all the facilities. Maybe you sort of focus on the primary healthcare facilities first. So even within a particular health program where you're introducing tracker, you would typically also have aggregate data. And to be able to look at that together, you need to aggregate the data and bring it into the aggregate domain. Another reason for aggregating the case-based data is to be able to use the analytics tools in DHIS. So while we have the line listing, for example, where you can look at the individual cases, That's typically something that is most useful at the lower levels for the people in the facilities in the districts. But for a national program, it's not so useful to have a list of 2 million children in your immunization registry. You really need to have to look at the aggregate counts to be able to use that information. There are also things you're able to do with aggregate analytics tools that you're not able to do directly with the tracker data, even if you're looking at the counts. Although one limitation that has been there for a long time about not having the ability to disaggregate the program indicators is exactly what Jim will be talking about. So that's now actually possible. So in some ways, through this work of making it easier to aggregate your data, you're also making it slightly less useful because you add some functionality to the program indicator analytics. I think it's also important to keep in mind that this idea of having the monthly reports, the quarterly reports on different health services, that's sort of an institutionalized part of the health service. And even if you introduce a tracker program, you might want to keep that as part of the sort of official information system reporting where people signed off on the numbers, and maybe you want to have a data set that you actually look for editing after a certain period of time, etc. Yeah, just a very sort of simplified example here. But if you have a case where you have tracker for VPD surveillance of vaccine preventable diseases, and if you really want to have a sort of full picture of that that use case or domain, you might have to also look at your stock data for vaccines, that is aggregate numbers. You need to look at your population estimates, which is aggregate numbers. And you might have an immunization registry, which could be case-based or aggregate. But the only way to bring that together is to produce the aggregate numbers if you want to triangulate this different data sources. So how to do this? I mean, there are many ways to produce aggregate data values from a tracker if you know how to build your own solution. So, I mean, there are people building scripts using the API, using SQL. It's possible to do things with predictors for doing this. It's possible to use other third-party tools to do the aggregation. But what is now sort of the official, recommended, and built-in way to do this in DHIS is through the use of program indicators and the data exchange app, which lets you set up all the tracker-to-aggregate configuration within DHIS itself without having to rely on any outside tools. So the program indicators define how you do the counting of the individuals in the tracker program, including with the disaggregations from version 42. The data exchange app with the data exchange service lets you define at what level you want to aggregate, what periodicity you want to aggregate the data at. And then the scheduler app lets you decide how often to actually do the aggregations. So that's sort of the built-in tools in DHIS for setting up tracker-to-aggregate sort of just using the core functionality. I think I will just talk briefly through this. This is sort of the flow of data within DHIS2. If you're following this sort of the recommended approach, we have our raw data values stored in DHIS, the tracker data elements, enrollment data, attributes, which is brought into the tracker analytics database, or the tables, which is used as the source for the program indicators that we define, setting up how you actually do the aggregation, how you do the counting. through the data exchange service, that is brought out into a new format, data value set format. So essentially creating the aggregate data values, which is again imported into the aggregate data value tables in DHIS. And then from that, you create the aggregate data analytics tables and do all the reporting visualizations using the data visualizer. So that's sort of the flow of data from your raw tracker data all the way through to aggregate analytics, which you see in a dashboard. One thing to keep in mind here is, I mean, if you just have a tracker program, one instance of DHIS with the tracker program, you would typically do all this tracker to aggregate stuff just within that instance. You have your tracker, you do the tracker to aggregate, and you end up with your tracker and aggregate data within the same instance. What is very often the case is that you have multiple instances of DHIS2. So for a Ministry of Health implementation, you would typically have the HMIS aggregate instance, and then the tracker, whether it's an immunization registry or HIV tracker or whatever, would sit in a different DHIS2 instance. And then the question is, do you just extract the tracker data and push it directly into the HMIS, or do you first do the aggregation within the tracker instance and then push the aggregate numbers into the HMIS later? In terms of the data exchange service, that sort of supports both options. It allows you to do the aggregation within one instance or to push the data directly to a different instance. Both are doable. I think in general, we recommend doing the aggregation first in the tracker instance for a couple of reasons. First of all, that you might have users that only use the tracker instance, and that might actually want to have the aggregate numbers in the instance they have access to be able to analyze the data also in the aggregate format. And it also makes the tracker to aggregate sort of conversion slightly easier to control and manage. Because you just have to deal with one instance, you know that the organization units within that instance won't create any problems. And it's, in general, just easier to maintain. The disadvantage here is, of course, that you need to have the aggregate metadata in that tracker instance, which can be an advantage in terms of analytics, but also needs one more thing that needs to be synced. And it does mean that you have to keep the org units in sync when you're doing the second step of actually moving your aggregate numbers from the tracker instance into the aggregate instance. So just to wrap up before I hand over to Jim to talk about the exciting new stuff. I mean, we've talked about, I've used many of the slides I've been showing now, been showing here before a couple of years ago. It's sort of it's nothing new in the approach at the moment, but there has been quite a few improvements in the last one or two releases, and also coming soon. So I just wanted to go through here some of the challenges that we know that implementations have struggled with when it comes to tracker to aggregate and what the sort of status is today. So I mean, the first problem for a few years was that we didn't really have this data exchange app and service, so there was no way of doing this without having some outside script or tool for actually moving the data from the tracker domain to the aggregate domain. But now with the data exchange API and app, which I think was introduced in 39, we do have a way of doing this within DHIS2 with a user interface that you can use to set it up. So that issue of not having any built-in tools for doing this has been addressed. We are aware that there is one edge case where the current way of doing the tracker to aggregate doesn't fully work. which relates to sort of edge cases where you have tracker data that is modified so that your aggregation, your count is 0. You had one case, and now we have 0 cases. The data exchange service doesn't then delete the previously aggregated value. So that's, in practice, very minor issue, but we know that that's an issue in some cases, and that's being worked on now, so that will be addressed. Another challenge has been that setting up all these program indicators and managing them have been a challenge. In many cases, you have ended up with hundreds of program indicators. And I mean, there's the PDAC app that was developed to help you sort of automate the creation of these program indicators, but it's still been complex to then maintain them, and if there are changes, you need to update hundreds of program indicators. But with the program indicator disaggregation that Jim will talk about, that will in many cases be improved a lot. You will need a lot less program indicators to manage this. The performance of doing actually moving the data has been a challenge for big implementations. Again, the program indicator disaggregations will help a lot on the performance here. And in 43, the plan is to have also the possibility of having a dedicated analytics backend for DHIS2, which should also improve the performance here significantly if you use that. Final thing that I also mentioned on the last step is the need for having the org unit synced. So if you're moving tracker data from one instance to another instance, you need to manage then the organization units across those instances. That's also now supported through this reference implementation that the extensibility team has developed. So it's not built into DHIS itself, but there is a reference implementation showing how to set it up using the recommended interoperability tools. So I'm not sure if it's sort of officially published yet as finalized, this simple reference implementation, but it is available on GitHub for those who want to look at it. And I know in this monthly extensibility calls that they're doing, I think next week the topic will be exactly on the organization unit sync reference implementation. So for those interested in that, I think it's a good opportunity to sign up for this extensibility calls. And with that, I will hand over to Jim to talk about the disaggregations.
Thank you, Ola. I'm Jim Grace. I'm a back-end developer for DHIS2, and I had the privilege of writing the back-end code for program indicator disaggregations the past few months. And I will talk about that. I'll go back to an excerpt from a slide that you just saw, where we have program indicators, and as Olav was saying, sometimes you have dozens or even hundreds of program indicators, depending on how many disaggregations you need and how many basic program indicator logic variants you need. But for all the disaggregations, you need currently one program indicator for each category option combination. If you have age and sex, you have how many age bands, you have how many sex bands, you multiply them together. That's how many program indicators you need for one piece of logic. With the program indicator disaggregation, you just need one program indicator for each piece of logic. Now, you may have several different logical indicators, and in the case of the Ghana HIV health system that you're about to see, they have 27 different logical program indicators, but each one of those then had to multiply by the number of disaggregations. So the program indicator disaggregation takes care of that. If you do have, you may have, again, different logical program indicators. And one of the things that the new feature does is you define the filters. What are your gender filters? What are your age band filters? You define them in one place in the program with the new design. And I'll show you on the next slide how that's done. And then different logical program indicators can all refer to the same filter definitions. So within the program, this is new metadata that you have in version 42. You can define which categories your program indicators may want to disaggregate. So for example, they may want to disaggregate the gender category. You define a mapping for that and say female, this is the filter expression, male, this is the filter expression. These filter expressions are exactly the same syntax and requirements you would have if you create a program indicator and you go to the filter section and type in the filter. In fact, we recommend that you do that and then copy and paste the filter into here. And I'll show you again on a demo how that's done. Sometimes a category may have more than one mapping, particularly if you have a category of age. You may want to have one mapping, one program indicator wants to show the age at the time of the event. And then maybe a different program indicator may want to show the age at the time of enrollment. Maybe you want to show the age at the time of the reporting period start. All these are different things that you can script differently and allow a program indicator to choose which mapping does it want to use for a particular category. In the program indicator, then, you select which disaggregation category combination you want. In this case, gender plus age would be the category combination. And then it prompts you for each category, which mapping do you want? For gender, there's only one choice. It's the standard gender mapping. For age, here you can choose age at event, or if you had multiple age mappings, you could choose a different mapping. Also, we allow you to have an attribute category combination. This is a lot of words, a lot of jargon. But if you use attribute option combos for like project or program or partner, all these things begin with P, don't they? You can define an attribute category combination, and again, it will prompt you which mapping do you want to use for that. All these mappings are defined once in the program, and then the program indicators can just make use of that. Also, as you'll see in a moment in the demo, you can see a disaggregation in the data visualizer now with a program. Suddenly a program will have, in this case, gender and morbidity age as disaggregated dimensions that you can see. So on to the demo. I'll share my screen. Should I replace current share or? Yes. Good. So the way this is all configured is through the new preview maintenance app. And you probably don't have it on your system. You can go to the app management, app store, app hub, download it from there, add it to your system. And the way you do it is you find under other, you'll see program disaggregation. So you come and click there, and you can set up a disaggregation mapping for that program, which will then be available for all the program indicators within that program. And here I've set up one for demo purposes on the Sierra Leone demo test database, a program indicator for morbidity and mortality. So here you select a category combination that you want to disaggregate to. And in this case, it's morbidity, age, and gender. And then for each of those categories, again, for gender, there's no choice. For morbidity, age, in this demo, there's no choice, but you might have age, again, age by event, age by enrollment, whatever you want there. Then you also can configure the program, and this is where you put in all the filters. So for a program, you can say, what categories do I want my program indicators for this program to be able to disaggregate by? And here I've set up gender, where it automatically prompts you what's the formula for female, what's the formula for male. On the SL demo database, those are the two categories for gender. And you can add another mapping if you want to have gender more than one way. Same for morbidity, age. Again, it knows the category options for that category, and so it prompts you. What's the formula for 0 to 11 months? What's the formula for 12 to 59 months, and so on, and you can type them in. And then this is all for disaggregation categories. Again, if you have attribute categories, if you want to have output but for implementing partner and project, target and result, whatever you want to do there, you can also configure that. So once you've configured that, and then you can come in and I'm going to show in the data visualizer. First of all, before I pick anything, notice that the gender and the morbidity age don't have the green star next to them. They're not categories that are active yet. But once I go in and choose my program indicator, suddenly gender has a green dot next to it, and morbidity age has a green dot next to that, meaning I can select those now as categories for this program indicator. So let's bring gender up here and say, yes, add them all. And suddenly we have a program indicator disaggregated by gender. We want morbidity age as well. We can add that. And make sure that 15 years plus is the lowest category, is at the end of the list. And suddenly we have a program indicator disaggregated by age and gender. Now I'm going to show the aggregate data export. And before I show that, I just set up a little data set to look at what the output will be. And so you see here for morbidity and mortality counts, there's no data yet. May, April, March, and so on. In the aggregate data exchange, this works the same way that it always does, except now it will include the disaggregations. So I have a data exchange set up here. It shows the totals across all the disaggregations. I submit the data, and it generated 96 values. I can go back, and if I do a cache clear, got to clear that cache, reload all the stuff. Then suddenly you see the data, and if you see, here's the acid test. Female 0 to 11 months in March. The data went away. Why'd that happen? Gender, morbidity, age. Female 0 to 11 months, 24. Female 11 is, ooh, 25. Missed it by one. Okay, we'll have to look into that. What? It's a different month. That was March, and I was looking at June. March is 25, 25, 89, 258. 25, 89. Ooh, I'm so relieved. Thank you, Olaf. That's why you have colleagues, right? So that is it. We saw the data exchange. We saw the disaggregation in the data visualizer. And one more slide before I hand it over to my colleague from Ghana. Stop screen share. Why is this not advancing? This is why you have technical support. There we go. So in a moment, Oswald's going to come up and share results from the first use of this that I know of for real-world data in Ghana on their HIV system running DHIS2. They have 27 program indicators. That's before you start all the disaggregating. That they need to transfer into aggregate data with 2 gender options and 11 age bands, so that's 22 total disaggregations. And right now in their production system, to do the conversion with tracker to aggregate, they have to have 594 program indicators. That's the 27 different logical things they want to see times the 22 disaggregations that each one needs. And now they can do everything with the original 27 program indicators. They all use common filters that are defined in the program. So the filters are all in one place on one screen instead of in 594 different program indicators, each one having a filter for a particular category option combo. So they're going to have 27 program indicators in this part of the system instead of 621 because they had the 594 with disaggregations. They had another 27 that showed the totals. I'm going to hand it over to my colleague Oswald, who I've been working with this past week to try to get some of this prototype on a sandbox system with real data, real data.
Thank you, Jim. Okay, my name is Oswald. So in the past week, I've been trying to test out this new tool with Jim. And for me, it was satisfying to be the one testing it because I have primary responsibility to make sure that we have our tracker data move into the national aggregate system. And it's about the last jigsaw that we need to fix when it comes to tracker implementation in Ghana, because the questions end users ask every day is, when will I have the pleasure of just entering my tracker data? And at the end of the month, I have my aggregate data in the national HMIs. And for them, that particular need is critical to ensure that we go fully digital. So it was refreshing to be the one to test it. And clearly, as Jim indicated, the need was to, on monthly basis, push aggregated data for close to 621 program indicators for about 701 facilities that are providing ART services across the country. And so every month we need to push that into the national HMIS, and that is huge. What we have done currently was to use the PDAC app to do the disaggregation. Previously, we had to sit down and write those 621 program indicators manually all by ourselves. The next step was to then at least write 27 and then use a tool to disaggregate them. But that still meant that we're only making our work easier, but the system was still suffering because the system will still have to run these 621 program indicators to be able to provide us with aggregated data. So what have we been doing? Since the tool became available, what I did was to test with the regional hospital for the national capital, the Greater Accra Regional Hospital, and we tried to configure the two most complicated program indicators we have on our HIV instance, which is the currently on treatment for ART and also lost to follow-up. They are the heaviest queries on the database. And so I configured that for the last 3 months and tried to go through the routine first, trying to do tracker to aggregate within the HIV instance, and then also ultimately pushing it into the national HMIs. But that step, of course, is dependent on the configurations between these two instances. So the test we did was just within the HIV instance for internal exchange. Now, what did we find? We found out that for displaying the output in the data exchange app for the new program indicator disaggregation, it took us 17.66 seconds, and we had a display like this, showing us just 2 program indicators, and for the last 3 months. For the old one, it took us about 3.7 minutes to have it displayed this way for us. And this display included 44 program indicators because these are 2 base indicators, each of them having 22 disaggregations. So this took us 3.7 minutes to display against 17.66 in the new program indicator disaggregation. Then to do the actual submission, that is pushing it into the aggregate data values, the new program indicator took 41.72 seconds. And for the old one, it took us up to 4 minutes to have that submission successful. And that indicates that we are achieving about a 12.5 times faster fetching of the data from the aggregate, and then also a 5.7 times faster for the entire transfer to the aggregate data exchange. If you were to combine that with the performance of whatever server you are running on, then you could actually be hitting towards almost a 20 times faster submission of tracker to aggregate implementation across your system. And for us, we think that was a good one, and we hope to be able to upgrade very soon. We are waiting for the first patch, and then we can begin to test out this towards moving into production instance. Thank you.
I think it is now. Do people have any questions either for the program indicator disaggregation, or don't go too far, Olaf, about the tracker to aggregate in general? Yes.
Thank you very much. I think that's a big improvement. My understanding, or for the understanding of this feature, is for making this tracker aggregate, but not performance in terms of the program indicator itself. Because, yeah, I know that we are still having a challenge on the program indicator itself in terms of performance, but also the data exchange was another challenging. So I think you have solved one in terms of data exchange. But how about the program indicator itself in terms of performance of the program indicator, and especially for those facilities that have high volume of data?
Yes, I think that's exactly right. We have more problems to solve, and program indicator performance. We are looking into some ways. We've mocked up some different ways in SQL that we might greatly improve that, and we hope to be able to roll that into a future release as well. But so that's under study at the moment. But we know that depending on the complexity of the program indicator, it can take a long time. And at least with the disaggregation feature, if you have a very complex program indicator, if you only have to run it once for all the disaggregations, that should be a big performance gain to begin with. But we know we have more work to do.
Maybe just to add, I think you mentioned it now towards the end, but I think still, if you have a dashboard where you used to have 50 program indicators, and you can now move to having 10 program indicators with disaggregations, it will be a lot faster also to render that dashboard, because you're only fetching 10 slow program indicators instead of 50 slow program indicators. So it will help in some cases in general, because you're doing fewer program indicator sort of requests or calculations. And I mean, Jim can talk more about how the actual SQL queries are reduced and all the technical details. I'm not sure if it's...
Yeah, so a program indicator results in one SQL query to the database. And the program indicators with disaggregations still use only one query to the database. But now as the data comes out of the database, we're getting all the disaggregation information from that query, whereas before we were just getting a single filter for a single disaggregation. George, over here.
Thanks a lot. So first of all, thanks a lot for the configuration. That's a great improvement. Looking forward to using it immediately. And I don't want to be ungrateful, but I'm just wondering, thinking about the tracker to aggregate logic, now I can disaggregate my program indicators, which is, if you want, like the columns. So is there a plan to allow this mapping or disaggregation, or let's say mapping also at the tracked entity instance level? So basically I have like, I have my program indicators disaggregated, but I have, let's say, 100 tracked entity instances that I could map those against 100 data elements and basically have all my tracked entity, my tracker to aggregate data transferred basically with one command, ideally, with one. Okay, I'm challenging you, but I'm just wondering, some kind of tool that will allow to even simplify and go the next dimension and kind of transfer a whole table from tracker to aggregate. Thank you.
Fortunately, this is not a surprise for me. George asked me this question yesterday. I didn't know he had 100 different commodities that he's modeling, so that would be a big savings. Technically, that's quite possible to do. Please make a JIRA ticket. We're driven by what people actually need and what the use case actually is. And I would say that to everyone. If you want new things in DHIS2, make a JIRA ticket. And if you think it's in my part of the product, please send me an email and let me know. We don't put things into, I have lots of great ideas, but I don't get to go and put them all in the code unless it's actual things that the community needs. And then all I can say, George, is that, of course, it goes into the priority process and what we need to do in each release. Yes.
Yes, thank you for the presentation. My name is Aus from Uganda. I was just wondering, during the expression for the program, for the combos, did you say that you use the actual expression that is used with the program indicators as well? Does it fetch like values from the actual data elements? As an example, maybe you talked about a filter that includes implementing partners. Does it fetch that particular value from the data element itself? Say, for instance, if I had the data element that uses option sets, does it actually fetch the value as an option within that particular data element? And if yes, then I think that would be a source solution to some of my needs that may not include other people.
Yeah, so for tracker data elements, you have an option set. For aggregate data elements, you have a category with category options, and you have that information often defined in two different places in the system. That problem is not solved yet, at least. You need to define the mapping to go from, if I understand the question correctly, you still need to define the mapping for each of the options in the option set to map to each of the options in the category, each of the category options. When we were discussing how to do the tracker to aggregate disaggregations, that exact idea came up a lot. And we were saying, how do we simplify? How do we just do the mappings automatically? One of the things that led us to do it this way with the formulas is we realized that for age mapping, there's not a single way to do it because it depends on the age at what stage of the tracker program. You can map it different ways. And so at least for now, we just have the general filter expressions that you can define for each option. Am I understanding the question? Thank you. Over here.
The question is for you. Just as you said, or I read that you are developing an org unit synchronization for the tracker to aggregate process. So I'm wondering, what is this about? Is something related to metadata sync or is something different? Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not fully updated on that whole thing. It's something the extensibility team is working on as a reference implementation, using some of the interoperability tooling. So it's not part of the metadata sync within DHIS2. I think it relies on the he's setting up this Apache Camel infrastructure on the server and using that to sync multiple DHIS2 instances. So it's not really related to the tracker to aggregate functionality or the metadata sync. It's a sort of standalone tooling for org unit sync in general, but useful for this kind of use case. But I think if you look in the slide, I included a link to a GitHub page describing the whole org unit reference, org unit sync reference implementation.
Any other questions? I'll put in a plug for a session that I'm doing right after lunch. I don't know which room, but it's in the schedule, on a deeper dive into program indicator disaggregations, where I'll give some tips and tricks and some more of the workings and how to actually implement it. Extra lunchtime?
Yeah. There are no final questions. I think we can end here.
Thank
Head to
you.
lunch.
Oh, one more. But the microphone helps the people who are on Zoom.
Yeah, so this is a bit related to what I asked initially. If I have, because for my case, we have like tracker programs that have options that are over 100. So if I was to create combinations for those, do I have to create like a combination per option for those 100 plus options that are in data element? As an example.
Yeah, that's true. And at the moment, you have to create a category with the same over 100 options, category options for that category. And then you have to have a filter that says if it's A, it's A. If it's B, it's B. If it's C, it's C. If it's D, it's D. Does that answer the question? And maybe at some point we'll figure out a more clever design so you don't have to do that duplication. But at the moment, they are duplicated between the option set and the category options. Anything else? Last chance. All right, thank you.